Hey, welcome to another episode where we're making Zelda in Game Maker. Today we're going to build off of what we talked about in the last episode where we are building rooms and levels dynamically. And so what I have is some slides that we had in the last episode. I'm going to build on that. One of the ideas is that we're going to dynamically build the room that you're seeing, the current room, as well as eventually getting the next rooms that you're going to see and build those as we need to. So if you hit the left and you would build this one out. If you hit right, you'd build that one out, so on and so forth. So I'm going to break it down for how we're going to deal with just one room at a time. So here's an example of a room. We got the menu up at the very top, and we've got the room here, very simple room that has all the tiles. You can think of this being broken down into 176 different tiles across the room. So in this example, I've got 16 tiles across and 11 going down, and each of them has a number. These numbers are going to represent the concepts of what should be in the level or in the room at that given time. So the 2s are representing the stone, rock, and the 3s are just representing nothing or the floor. This is arbitrary. The numbers are arbitrary, but you could put whatever you want there. You could start to think that we could build out number 4, meaning it's the entrance to a level, or 5 equaling something else. But you kind of get the point. We're going to break it up into this. And if I go take this a step further, how we're going to store this information so that we can use it later and build up the level is that we break out each of the rows as the numbers and combine them all as one big string. So you see the 222 here, and then the 2 and the 3s in the middle here. If I were to add all 176 of these together, you're going to get something like this, and that's going to be our room data for a specific room. This is how we're going to build up our level. We can later then go back through this and loop through each of these numbers and start building out what the room looks like on the screen. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about is that we're going to have a room object in the game that's going to contain all the data about the room, including the room data that I just showed. So the room data is what's actually in the tiles, and then there would be other information like the exit to the north, the exit to the south, and so on and so forth. There would be enemies and so on. That's what we're going to deal with today. In fact, all I'm going to deal with today is showing you guys how to build something like this, where we take this string, get that, and actually show it in the level. Now let's use some of that information to start working on the code. I've already built out all the code just to make it easier to go through the tutorial, and I'm going to walk you through it. The first thing we need is this object for a room. This is going to represent all the data for the room. And today, all we're going to deal with is the tile data. So if I go to the create event, I've got this room data that looks just like I showed you earlier, which is here's each of the tiles in one long string. The other thing we have here is a room surface. We're going to pass a surface into this room so that this room, this object, knows how to render itself to its own surface. Later, we're going to use that because we're going to have multiple rooms showing at the same time when we're transitioning from one room to another. If we go up, we have to render that new room and slide it down, and both of them are going to show at the same time. And we're going to achieve that by showing both surfaces at the same time. So this is going to be one surface that we paint to, and then the other room will have its own surface to paint to as well. So going into the draw event, this is where things get a little bit tricky, but I'll walk you through it. Just like before, all we're doing is we're setting the surface that we're going to paint to. So this is the canvas that we'll paint to. We clear it. And now the rest of this is really looping through that data, the room data, to figure out which tile to show on to the screen. So the first thing is I have a little custom function called string to array that takes that string, the room data, and splits it based on the spaces, so that now I have something nice that I can loop through and figure out which tile I'm playing with at a certain moment in time. I thought GameMaker had its own function for splitting a string, but it doesn't. And when I was looking for it on the internet, trying to figure out where it was, I actually stumbled across an article in Stack Overflow that explained how they achieved their own split string. That's what this code is. I'm not going through this. I'm going to show it here. You can pause it and look at it, and you can download it. It's going to be part of the project file. But the whole point of this is just to split a string based on whatever you pass in as a delimiter, a space in my case, and return it as an array. All right, so the next thing that we're doing is we're looping through each one of those tiles. I grab the tile from the array based on the index that we're at. And what we're going to do down here is draw whichever tile return. So in our case, I'm just keeping this simple. I had a tile that was equal to 2 or 3. And this draw background part is a special function in GameMaker that says draw part of a background image. This may not work in GameMaker 2. Since I haven't tested this out, I don't even think backgrounds exist in GameMaker 2. So be aware of that. You may have to try a different route. When I figure it out, I'll show you guys as well, but I'm not doing GameMaker 2 yet. So anyway, this background overworld green is something we've had in the past. It's just this tile set that I've imported. And we're looking for either this tile, the rock, which is represented by the 2, or this floor, which is represented by the 3. Okay, so the rest of this code is really two things: which tile to grab and where to paint it. So the way to look at this, I'm going to go over this part first and then come back to this code. What this is asking for is what's the background name? So it goes and grabs that background. What's the X coordinate of where I start finding the tile that I want to draw? So 1 times tile size. So this basically is 16 is the X coordinate. And what's the Y coordinate, which is 0, which is the very, very top. As if you remember, the very, very top, that's 0. How many pixels to the right do I go? 16. How many pixels to the bottom do I go? You go 16, and that's the tile that it's going to draw. Same thing for here. You notice I put times 2, so it's going over one more tile to grab that tile. And then the XX and the YY is where to paint it on the actual screen. And the way I do this is I do a mod of whatever index we're on, a mod 16. And if you're not familiar with mod in GameMaker or any other programming, all it does is you divide this number by this number and it gives you the remainder. So if this was 0 mod 16, it would return 0. If it was 1 mod 16, it would return 1. If it was 17 mod 16, it would also return 1. And that's what lets us loop back around on the X once we pass 16 tiles, since it's 16 tiles wide. So this helps us figure out what the X coordinate is, 0 through 15 in our case. And then we multiply it by the tile size because that's how many pixels we need to multiply it by to get it on the actual screen. So it's telling it, do I start with 0, 16, 32, so on and so forth. And then the Y, I do the same thing. Instead of a mod, I'm actually doing a div, and this gives me a whole number. If this is 0 and I divide by 16, it's just going to be 0. If it's 1 divided by 16, it's still 0. Until I get to 16, then it equals to 1. So this tells me how far down the Y-axis to go as far as painting on the screen. So these are really helpful and good for you to understand mod and div. So I recommend you play around with those. And I almost forgot to explain this part. It's pretty simple though. How we're actually switching and figuring out which tile to paint, we're using a switch statement here, which is we grab the tile that we got out of this array. It's either, in this case right now, it's only to be 2 or 3, but you can imagine later we would have a bunch of different types of tiles that could be drawn. And we make that decision based on that tile. Okay, so that's the object room. So now what I have is I have an object that I can call and it will paint to a surface, and then I just need to paint that surface to the screen. So let's go. We're going to now go into our states. We're going to go to script states and then into the game end level. So this right here, most of this code was already there from the last episode. And you can ignore this. This is going to be for a future episode that I'm going to show you. But this is all the new code right here that we're going to focus on. So the first thing we're going to do is, if there's not an object room in the level already, let's go ahead and create that and make that and set a variable called current room equal to a new instance of the object room. And then what we're going to do is, I told you that we had that room surface. We're going to pass in the surface level and pass that in. And so now that is the canvas that it's going to paint. And in our previous episode, when we first did the surfaces, if you remember, we already have something that paints the surface level to the screen. So automatically, this code right here is going to generate that level based on that data that we put in. So let's do that real quick. Okay, so this which you can't tell, is based on the dynamic level data that we passed into it. So it is that square box, just like I showed you in the example of the presentation. So to prove that this is dynamically working, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go change this. Let's go to the room. And I'm just going to change some of these to 3s right here. And so automatically I can go back here and I can show you that this took effect. Okay, so now you see the little gaps in here, and that's all data driven. All right, we'll stop there for today. Hopefully you got a lot out of this episode and understand where we're going with building dynamic rooms. In the next episode, we're going to do more of this with generating another dynamic room when we transition to one and use multiple surfaces to do that transition. Thanks for watching. And I'd also like to give a big shout out to all my patrons that support me on patreon.com. And the folks that you see on the screen right now, these are the names of the people that support me at the $5 and above level. Your support means a lot to me. Thank you so much. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.